Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
All right, good afternoon all. So hopefully you had a good lunch. And we have here Professor KVS Hari, who's the chair of the EC department, also the professor there, who's going to be giving a talk on experiments in indoor localization and vehicle classification. He leads the statistical signal processing lab at ECE. And he has a PhD from UC San Diego, and he's been with IAC for the past about 30 years or so?
24.
34, okay.
24.
24, all right. And he's also got an affiliate position at KTH in Stockholm, in Sweden. And he's also a fellow of the IEEE. So I'll hand it over to him.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everyone. I hope you're awake, and my task is to keep you awake. So this is, first let me also thank the organizers, Microsoft and Mr. Yogesh and Swami Manohar, who were kind enough to invite me. So let's look at, there are two mini talks in my talk. So I will share with you some of the experiments we did in indoor localization vehicle classification. So I will flip the order because chronologically we did the vehicle classification first. So let's start that. So what we mean by classification of vehicles using sensors, okay? So the idea is for road traffic management. Suppose you want to know the number of vehicles traveling on a road or at an intersection, and you would like to ensure that you have a nice algorithm which can control the traffic in an efficient way, so that the time taken from point A to point B crossing several junctions would be minimized, right? And especially is needed for Bangalore, and I saw a recent news item that Bangalore is trying to synchronize the traffic signals, okay? So right now, if you look at Bangalore traffic, you will have a very nice fixed schedule of traffic signals, and they are published on the website. So you exactly know at what time the signal will go red and green, and at every junction, okay, wherever they have. So the idea was that this was a project from Department of Information Technology, and my co-investigators were Professor Anurag Kumar, whom you would have heard before, and Professor Shalabh Bhatnagar, and CDAC, Trivandrum. So currently, if you want to know whether there is a vehicle at the, or you want to count the number of vehicles at a traffic intersection, what do you think is the technology used? They use something called an induction loop, right? All of you would have studied that if you have a loop and there is a magnetic material or metallic object which goes over a loop, then it will induce something, correct? So you would actually see that the loop is laid by digging the road, putting the loop, and then they do some counting. But it is not done at every junction, only junctions of importance. The other technology is video and image. So you have a video camera, and then you have a recognition software which will count the number of vehicles, etc., and so on and so forth. But then the idea is that can we do this without digging the road and without using cameras, because cameras would require lighting, correct? So you would like to see whether we can use a technology of magnetometers, and using magnetic signatures whether we can classify vehicles of a different kind. So magnetometers are now available. Some of your smartphones also have them, not all, but some of them. And what they do is they sense the magnetic field. Generally it is assumed that the magnetic field of the earth is uniform across a few kilometers at a particular point on earth, and you have these magnetometers which can sense the change in the earth's magnetic field. So so these are called anisotropic magnetoresistive sensors, AMR. They detect the distortion. So this figure, or this picture shows that one can have a magnetometer on the road where the vehicles would pass over it, or you could have it on the side on the pavement, okay, just at the side. And I'll show you what kind of, so these are typical magnetometer readings. I'll show you more details about it. So typically what happens is when a vehicle sort of, so let's assume that you have a sensor on the side of the road, and then there is a vehicle which is approaching it, and as the vehicle approaches, the sensor, the magnetic field keeps changing because there is a metallic object which is approaching the or intersecting the, I mean there are fields here also, I am just only giving you the fields which the sensor is sort of sensing, okay. So when it moves, then you will see that there is a distortion in the magnetic field because of this large metallic component which is moving. And it is clear that the shape and size, the shape and duration of this distortion will depend upon the size of the object and the velocity with which it would move, right. So this is equivalent to changing the magnetic field. So there will be a change in the magnetic field sensed by the sensor. Okay. So now how do we know that it actually changes? This is the theory which says that this is what it is. So we said, okay, let us see whether we can actually find out how the magnetic field would change if there is a vehicle. So there are two things, right? Either you have the vehicle go over the sensor or on the side of the sensor in a controlled way, or using the relative motion concept, you keep the vehicle stationary and move the sensor, right? That is much easier for us to collect the data because you can't control, if you put a magnetometer on the side of a road, you will not know. Then you need to actually get some idea about what is the speed of the vehicle and then correlate with the signature. So we decided that we will attack the parking lots of IISc and some friendly neighborhoods of residential places, and so a bunch of students, mostly bachelor's interns, went on this. So they designed one, they took a remote control car, okay, so that they can zoom the car either on the side of the actual car and or below the car. And then we decided that because of the height of this remote control, we designed something with a skateboard, okay, which we could draw. So what we did is that, so let's say this is the car in the parking lot. We moved either the remote control car or the skateboard, depending on the side, one which is on the one side, both sides, and underneath the car, because that is where you would sense the magnetic component, and you would notice that the engine would be having a more metallic component than the rear of it, or at the middle it will be different. So we sort of did an engineering consistent pulling of the skateboard with a certain uniform velocity by having a timer and pulling that whole thing from one end to the other end of the car and so on and so forth. With some variation, we have a database which is there. So this is what we did. So we had a database. So we had signatures for different kinds of cars. Okay, this was done a few years back. So therefore, you will not see the latest car models, but you will see that we took cars of different lengths, which is about 3 to 3.5 meters. So this is the type of the car, Maruti 800, Alto, and so on and so forth. Type 2, 3.5 to 4, 4 to 4.5, and greater than 4.5, which were larger cars. So the idea was to see whether we can actually classify the signal, classify the car or the vehicle based on the magnetic signature if the car passes by a magnetometer. Okay, that is the objective. Yes. Yeah. So in the parking lot database experiment, we don't have cars moving at all because the sensor is moving and the car is stationary. This is a database. Your question is valid. If there are two cars, what happens? So if you keep the sensor on one side of the road, it is likely that the effect of the car which is closest to the sensor will dominate the signal. But yes, that question we also asked ourselves, but it was a bit tough to get that information. So we assume that it is we can use superposition there and see whether we can change. Yeah. Yeah, it depends on the sensitivity of the magnetometer. So as you saw in the picture before, we were not very far. This is the sensor which is on a speed breaker. So because then we know that the car would actually go slow, and the car would just go along this. So it's a few less than 2 meters or whatever, few feet. Yeah. The signal strength would depend on the proximity of the car. Okay. So now we have a set of data. Yeah. Yes, yes. Sure. Going and coming meaning you will have a sensor on the other side of the road, right? Of course, in India we don't know what happens, but we assume that the car is going. We don't care whether the car is going from left to right of the sensor. Because once the car moves, there is a change in magnetic flux density, and you sense it. So it's not really. So we did take data points from going from the back of the car to the front and from the front to the back. So it sort of covers. So the richness is that we have several data sets for each car. So let us say, of course, as I said, there were more 800 cars. So we had 8 cars, okay, 8 different kinds of Maruti 800 cars for which we collected data sets. Okay. It can distinguish if you are able to parse the data signal sequence, right? You will see that you can see that these are the typical signatures, okay, of one car. Fine. This is a typical signature of a one car. So this is Alto, this is Indica, and right now it is actually looks a bit of a random signal. So what you would do is we wanted to first do a detection and then classification, right? First we need to know whether there is a car or not. So there is a detection problem which is not very difficult because seems to be some change in signal energy. If you compute, you will have some information about it. But how do you find out which one is which from this, right? And we have several sets of Altos and several sets of 800s, right? So it becomes a pattern recognition problem, correct? So you like to look at patterns in this. So what is the way? Suppose you want to state the problem. It is to classify vehicles using magnetic signatures. So what is your first step in system design? You would see whether you can do a data modeling of the magnetic signature, right? You would see whether you can model this signal with a fewer number of parameters instead of using all the data points, correct? So that is one, and then you extract the features of this and then use classification techniques so that you can then use on a reduced set of parameters, and then you can create your clusters and do whatever you want. You can run a support vector machine, etc. So this is the paradigm under which we sort of work with data which we have collected based on this relative motion. So the first model, yeah.
Did you manually write which car gives which signal, or was it?
Yeah, so let me again, I think maybe you have missed what I am trying to say. This database is collected in a parking lot. It is not that the cars are moving on the road, okay? It's collected on the parking lot because we wanted a reference data set, correct? So it was difficult, as you said, to calibrate what is the speed of the car, which car is going, then we need to coordinate many things. So we did try that. We actually had people watching where the cars are, we looked at the signature, but it was very difficult to look at it. So this is a parking lot, so it's a very controlled experiment of database. Later on we applied it to a vehicle where it is not like a regular traffic, one car at a time. In IISc you can have one car at a time scenario. Yes.
Manually by seeing which car gives which signal, or was it automated? Like Maruti 800, how did you know that particular signal as of Maruti 800? Did you manually?
We conducted the test with the Maruti 800.
Okay.
It's a database collection, right? So that is a labeled data. Okay. So that's what it is. Then we categorize the cars in different types based on the length of the car, okay, or the size of the car. Okay. So for Maruti 800, we labeled the data and said this is Maruti 800, then Alto, then like that. Okay, is it clear? Yeah. So now we wanted to see whether we can fit a model, what kind of model we can do. So So the mathematical model is to see whether we can have a magnetic dipole model. That means we model the car as a collection of magnetic dipoles. Okay? So the car will be modeled as if magnetic dipoles with certain magnetic moments, and then the sensor is actually sensing based on that model. Okay? So you have to go back to your physics, high school physics, if you have not forgotten. So you can get equations which basically describe the induced magnetic field at a certain point in space based on the magnetic moment of the car. Okay? Now there are many variables, and you can, so since there is not much time, I will not go into details, but just assume that all this is fine, and then you have a model which depends on the distance. Somebody asked the question whether how far the thing would be. So the signal will depend upon the distance and the strength of that magnetic dipole, right? And then you don't know how many you need to use, right? You could use an M dipole, so you could play around with it. So it's basically trying to parameterize the data with some model which is maybe reasonable. It is not that it is an exact model, it is a virtual model, right? You are trying to model it, just like you model speech with something, with some based on physics of the problem, you try and see whether you can do the modeling. So once you model it, then you would try to fit the data in a nonlinear least square sense. So you would like to know which kind of model parameters would be fitting the data. So you have the signatures, right? So you have about 80 signatures or 50 signatures, and you try to fit the model, or you take all these waveforms you obtain from a Maruti 800. Then you will get a model where you will know what is the strength of the moments. Okay, so there will be a feature vector, and you will just do a curve fitting. Okay, all of you are familiar with curve fitting, correct? So you do a curve fitting there, and then you come up with an algorithm. So let's not go into the details, but you just say that you have a parameter and you try to solve this cost function, and then you will get some normalized magnetic moments, and that will be your feature vector. Okay, so the test is that whether we can use that model and see whether it will fit the actual data. So using this magnetic model, we try to recreate a magnetic signature of a car, and we see whether there is a reasonable fit for different parameters. That means what happens if I use 3 magnetic dipoles, what happens if I use 4, you can use 5, 6, whatever it is, right? So we just chose 3 and 4 just to see that the mean square error was some value. Now nothing stops us from going with more and more dipoles and getting a better model. Okay, so this is just one model. So every signature can be modeled as a vector of magnetic dipoles with their strengths. Okay, and that can become your feature vector for classification. We just wanted to explore whether that is good enough for a classification. Okay, so then we also said, okay, we wanted to, because we actually wanted to do this real time on a small mote, correct? So we wanted to study the computation complexity also, whether we can actually write it on that small mote using TinyOS, whether how much of RAM is there, and so on and so forth. So let's assume that this is the model we used, and this is what it is. Okay. Yeah, so maybe I'll just skip this. So then we decided, okay, one model, we don't know whether the model is good enough or not. So let us say we wanted to look at another model. Okay. So another model was based on the sensor itself. Okay. So the previous one was just a signature, correct? So here we wanted to see whether the physics or how the sensor is made, whether using the phenomena behind sensing a magnetic field can be used to model that. So we call it MFA. I'll show you what it is. So what happens exactly in the sensor is that there is a current flow and there is an applied field. Then there is an angle between the magnetic vector, okay, which changes because of this change in the magnetic field. Okay. So if I am able to sense that change in the angle, it gives me some kind of a feature vector, right? So we also wanted to see whether we can use this with having minimum number of features, correct? So that we can do things faster. So we thought that we will try this. So typically in a magnetometer there is a Wheatstone bridge. All of you are familiar with Wheatstone bridge. So there is a Wheatstone bridge, and then there are some resistances, and then one of the resistance is actually being governed by this change in the magnetic field. Okay. So some equations, so don't worry too much about it. So this is what I want. Alpha is half sine inverse whatever is the parameter, and I can measure that. Okay. So the whatever flux changes the internal magnetization vector in the direction of the current, which makes the bridge unbalanced. So then you can read it. The sensor allows you to read that value, okay, whenever there is something. So we thought that we can use that. So again, we pose this as a modeling problem. You have data, you have a model which is depending on the angle, and this angle is a reasonably simple equation, right? So you can do things maybe, and then we again do this fitting, curve fitting, okay. So we call it magnetic field angle algorithm, and so that's what it is. And then again we try and see whether this algorithm also can fit some of the data. Okay, and then there is a cost function which is sort of lower than the previous one. Now there are existing algorithms for feature extraction. So the existing algorithms are Professor Varaya's group at UC Berkeley they have published a lot of work. They have done this road traffic measurements, etc. So they have something called an average bar transform, hill pattern transform. So they try to simplify things. So they try to quantize, use ones and plus minus ones, etc., and then try to classify the signal based on the vehicle classification. So we thought that we should compare our techniques with existing methods, right? That's what you have to do when you want to either show the efficacy of your algorithm and also to compare how well things happen, okay, how things work in practice. So this was our basis for that. So how do I now use the database, correct? How do I use the database? I have a certain set of records. I need to use some for training and some for testing, correct? That's what you would have learned, right? If I have 100 data sets, I will train on maybe some n or t, and the rest 100 minus dr can be used for testing. So there is a balance between how much of training you need, right, and how much of testing you need to see the algorithm's behavior. Suppose you train on a smaller subset and you test on a larger subset, it is possible that you have not, the model parameters have not been trained enough, correct? But if you train too much, then you don't know the actual performance because you have very little testing data for you. So we said, okay, let us just do it as a scientist, do all the experiments for different training and different testing, and then plot the or just tabulate. Yeah. So let's say we tabulate these results. So when I say LTR, that is training. So 70 sets, okay, 70 signatures were used for training, and 44 signatures were used for testing, right? And then we compute what is the error in classification or whatever. We run this to a SVM. I think I missed, yeah, sorry, I should have. So we use a SVM to produce the model, and then CR is basically the correct rate of classification for type 1 versus type 4. Okay, so I'm now looking at small cars and large cars. Okay. So if I do that, then we wanted to study the performance based on, so there is a lot more engineering tuning which happens, which I am not explaining in all great detail, because that is not really, that comes when you actually start fine tuning the algorithm. So let us take this. So if I use the data with increasing training and reduced testing, the average bar algorithm gives you about 72% or 73% for different kinds of data sets. So the good one is 76, the Hill transform gives 77, and then this dipole algorithm gives you about the same as this, so not much of a difference. So that was actually one of the motivations where we thought that our modeling is not adequate, okay, because we really don't know the model, and we don't know whether we should use more 4 dipoles or 5 dipoles. So the model has the strength of the dipole and the separation between the dipoles, right? A larger car, you can put 3 dipoles, but what is the separation between these dipoles also is part of the feature vector, okay? Now you can modify the model. We just chose this model, you can modify the model. So this is what it says. So 3 dipole normalized moments, that is the strength, and in the separation, okay, different kind of feature vector we can do. And then the angle separation. So let us say, so this data set for 80.48 was our between type 1 and type 4, and then between type 1 and type 2 and type 3 and type 4, you can see there is a reduced performance of classification, because the sizes of the cars are not too, the gap between the size of the car, for the size of the car, if you go back, you will see one is about 3 meters and the other one, I should have put this size of the car here. Yeah. So size of the car, type 1 is 3 to 3.5 meters and type 4 is greater than 4.5. So it sort of, it is intuitive that you do a better job of classifying type 1 and type 4, and type 2 and type 3 are a bit tough because they are not very different, right, in size. So it's a bit tough. So you get reduced classification performance. Okay. So this is just in some sense an experiment that you can count the number of, not just counting, but you can also see whether you can classify. Now how this classification will help in designing a traffic algorithm, right? How to control traffic lights is another task. Okay, somebody has to first give how many cars are passing, how many, what kind of cars are passing, and there are algorithms which need how many cars are waiting at a traffic light, at a traffic junction, right? Based on that, you can alter your algorithm to ensure that the cars move, correct? You need to know how many cars and what kinds of cars. Are they small cars or large cars, lorries and trucks? Now the question you can ask, which is that what happens if a motorcycle goes, because we have a very heterogeneous traffic, right? So we have a motorcycle, we have bicycles, we have bullock carts, all of them keep plying on our roads. So these questions are open for experimental. So a lot of potential for you guys to work on, right, to see what is the effect, all those questions, what happens if two cars are going together, what happens if a small car is followed by a large car, is there some hysteresis, will the sensor be having some memory of the previous car, all kinds of questions can be asked. So this is just one small experiment which given the constraint of time and resources we could do, just to show that this is possible for us to use the magnetometer, get the magnetic signature and determine which car is moving on a road. Okay, that's what it is. Yeah.
So for traffic management, I understand you want to differentiate between a car and a truck or something, but how would it matter if it's type 1 car or type 4 car?
Yeah, so it depends on the number of cars in a queue, right? If you look at it from a queuing theory problem, so you have large, let's say you have a server, right, and you have large files which have to be flushed out by the server or serviced by the server, right? So you can't, here you can't say I will allow half a car, correct? You need, so you need to know how much time it will take for a certain queue length to be sent to the next one. So the timing has to be such that it allows an integer number of different kinds of cars, right? If you, of course in India we can always do many things, but so it's just more from a theoretical model. You need to know, if you know the size of the files or the cars, it's called PCU, okay, car unit, passenger car unit. So there is an open source software called Green Light District, okay, GLD, okay. So you can use that to simulate traffic flow, okay. So the other, my colleague, co-investigator, Professor Shalabh Bhatnagar, he had a student who was looking at how do we generate traffic algorithms. So you simulate a multi-junction traffic thing, right? So 4 or 5 junctions, at each junction you can have multiple flows. You can go right, left, sometimes you have a fork, so all kinds of things you can simulate there. And then depending on the flow of traffic, how much of congestion, suppose there is a congestion, then you should adaptively change your algorithm so that you can allow the cars to go. So, and then alternate routes, etc., right? So Google Maps now gives you, based on traffic congestion, a reasonable route and gives you different route. How do you think they are computing? Something, they have some algorithm which is running, which does. So those are real-time algorithms. So this is just one part of a larger system. Okay, from a system design point of view, it is there. Internet of Things, yeah, if this is fed to a common central server, then you can optimize over a larger region, right? Suppose you have to manage 100 traffic signals, and then every traffic signal gives you the data of how many cars are there, what kinds of cars are there, how many are waiting at a traffic light, then you can adaptively change. So in some sense it is on the cloud IoT application. I have to connect to IoT, otherwise organizers will not be happy. Yeah, there was a question here. But we won't know, right? You want it automatically done. So if you have, so that becomes, if you have a sensor fusion problem, that means you have a camera data which is actually giving you, right? And in the night you don't have data if it is not visibly lit. Then it will be difficult for you to, and you can't have cameras. Cameras are expensive. Magnetometers are not that expensive. Of course, you need a communication platform, but that is much cheaper than having a camera and infrastructure, and then you have to send a video out onto your stuff, which is a lot more bandwidth. Magnetometers are low data rate, right? I mean, there's a few hundred hertz. In fact, maybe I should have given you the, so the signal, if you look at it, sampling is about 100 hertz, and so you extract the parameter online and send out the parameters. So it's much
from
more.
signature we can classify the type also.
Classify the type. That was the idea, just to get an idea about it. It's not, it may not be so critical, right? As you said, it may not be so critical, but if, well, we want to be as close to reality as possible. Yeah.
The signature depends on the body material also,
Yes.
isn't it? So do you take that also into account?
We haven't. I mean, we just took whatever cars were available on the road. We just took them, and then so as I said, this is just a small beginning. One can do extensive data collection. We need to have good data collection. Most of the times in our design, we forget that having a good quality database and data collection will help us model and design and do engineering better. System engineering will need a lot of data. We somehow avoid collecting data. We think that, okay, if it runs for 5 signatures or waveforms, my algorithm is robust. It is not. The more data you have, the better it is. So we miss out on that. Yeah. So all kinds of things we can have. The model can keep getting refined. Just that we didn't have, our team did not have the time and resource to continue on this work, but this is just a snapshot of what you have. Okay. So we now move to outdoor positioning of cars and not positioning now. So now we go to the next one, which is an indoor positioning experiment. So this is a joint activity between IISc and KTH, supported by both the governments. So what is indoor positioning, right? So indoor positioning of people and objects, I think, is an application area which most of you are familiar with. So firefighters and security personnel in a building, you would like to know where they are in a disaster building. A location of elderly people in care centers, so that you know where they are moving. If they are moving around, you would like to know where they are, so that you can keep track of them. Of course, location of customers in a shopping mall for targeted advertising. So if you are just walking by Pizza Hut and then you get a coupon for Pizza Hut, right? So that is good for you. Not good for your health, but yeah. And so on and so forth. So how do you do positioning, right? Positioning is basically based on triangulation, correct? If I want to know what is my position in this room, I would say what is my position in this room with respect to maybe the entrance of the room, or with respect to some fixed locations, right? If you know that, then it is easy for us to then convert that information to an absolute position. So first a relative position and then absolute position. So typically, how would you know? All of you have GPS on your phones. So how would you know your position using GPS? What is the principle of finding position? Okay. Okay. So it is basically based on finding the time of flight of the signal from reference points. So if you want to find my position, you can also have the same, right? You can have beacons put in this room, and then I can wear a tag or I can have something, and I measure the time signal. That means I sort of simulate or emulate the GPS concept in this room, correct? So I can have 4 satellites here or 5 satellites. I have 4 satellites and I keep receiving the signal from the satellite of the room. Find out how much time it takes. I should be able to find my distance, right? So distance is time of flight and distance are related, correct? So how much time it takes for the velocity of light. So that is one way of doing positioning. And so in all these applications of positioning, the accuracy depends on how well you can measure time. With nanosecond accuracy, picosecond accuracy, or even further femtosecond accuracy, then your accuracy of your positioning will be determined by that accuracy, right? So measuring time is one of the most fundamental problems which we all use the algorithms, but we haven't yet got a good algorithm for estimating time with a good accuracy for different applications. Okay. The other one is received signal strength method. Okay, so you can do a coarse estimation, right? It's called, let's say, RF fingerprinting. So what do? You have Wi-Fi access points in a room, in a building. So you take your phone, you know the signal strength. There is apps which will give you the received signal strength indicator, right? RSSI. You see these bars on your phone. Similarly, you can read out a value actually. So you just walk around. You walk in this building 20 times. Each one of you walks from one point A to point B and records the signal strength received from multiple Wi-Fi access points. Okay? So that becomes your feature vector. It is like a fingerprint. So the next time somebody walks, so that information you can have as a lookup table, and then next time when somebody walks with the app, it will have all this information that if you walk from point A to point B, and if the signal strength received by each of these access points is a certain value, then maybe you can do a pattern matching and say that with some probability that you are at that point. It's quite possible that you could have similar patterns for different points in space. So that ambiguity you have to resolve once you create this fingerprinting. So that is fingerprinting. Then you have visual tag based positioning. These are all indoor. So these are all controlled where you have infrastructure. So you can have your QR points, what do you call this, QR, what do you call them, tags on each room, and then you can say, okay, where am I? So you can just point your phone to that and it will tell you room number so and so, floor number so and so, that is one. So all this is fine, but so this is basically what it means. So you have different access points, and then you try to find the strength from each of these access points. You know which cell ID, which stuff, and then you try to compute. So a company has used a technology of ultra wideband. As I said, if your timing is important for you to measure, then you need shorter and shorter pulses, correct? If you use shorter and shorter pulses, the ability to resolve the time will be better, right? So shorter and shorter pulses means you need very high bandwidth. All of you would have studied the inverse relation between time support and frequency support, right? So the company called UBSense has this, they sell this infrastructure. So that means they will sell these receivers and they will be deployed in this room. So let's say in this room you can have it at 4 corners, and I wear a tag. This tag will be sending a pulse, a ultra wideband pulse, okay, battery operated ultra wideband pulse. This pulse is sent and it is measured by all this. So it's a reverse problem, right? GPS satellites are sending and you are receiving and computing. Now here you are transmitting something, somebody is receiving and then computing the range. It doesn't matter, right, who transmits, who receives, the range is what is important for you. So here it is not just the range, but they do lot more complicated signal processing called direction of arrival, angle of arrival, etc., and give you a very good location system. So if you look at, this is an old paper, almost now 9 years old, which gives you a nice summary of various indoor positioning algorithms. And on top you can see there is a Microsoft radar system, okay. So based on Wi-Fi, okay, and the accuracy is about 3 to 5 meters, and it uses some neural networks, okay, neural networks, Viterbi-like algorithm, and precision is 50% around this and 90% around this, and so on and so forth. Complexity is moderate, scalability is not bad, cost is low, so you do that. So that means there is a Wi-Fi network deployed in a building and I can find out where I am with reasonable accuracy. Then there are different solutions. Ikahu is a company from Finland which has done very well. They do a lot of positioning of objects in a factory and so on and so forth using Wi-Fi, just Wi-Fi. Okay. They have grown significantly. They started off as a very small company. I was keeping track of it almost, I think it's more than 20 years old or 15 years old. And then you have this UBSense. So you can see this accuracy, 3 to 5, 2 meters, 3 meters, 1 meter, 5 meters to 50, 2 to 3, and 15 centimeters. Okay. So 15 centimeter accuracy, you can find your position if you have a controlled system. That means I send out a UWB pulse, ultra wideband pulse, and I can measure my position to within 15 centimeter accuracy. Okay. So this experiment is sort of a different scenario. This is a very harsh environment where you will not have this Wi-Fi, etc. So let's imagine that there is a building, and the building has caught fire, so therefore there is no electricity, there is no Wi-Fi, or it could be a disaster due to a terrorist attack, whatever it may be. Okay. So the idea is that there is a first responder team which enters the building. Okay. There could be firefighters or there could be commandos or security personnel. So there will be a command station outside which will try to coordinate where these people are. Okay. Sometimes firefighters also they are also at risk because of the fire, etc., but you don't know where they are typically. So then GPS inside a building, you know that it doesn't give you great accuracy, correct? So you want to know where the team is, whether they are on which floor. Of course they can have a communication radio contact, but sometimes if they are not able to communicate because they are supposed to do their job, you may not be able to find out where they are. So this is a practical problem where people are unable to find where the team members are. Okay. So the task is, so always a system design or a product design starts with an English sentence definition, right? This is what I want. Somebody will say this is what I want. Then you translate, use, okay, which technology tool I should use, what is the technique, etc. Then you go ahead and see how to solve this problem. So the English statement of problem is the following. So assume no indoor wireless infrastructure is functional, right? So there is no Wi-Fi, you can't do all this Pizza Hut ad business here. Now tracking the position within 1 meter accuracy for an operation which lasts 30 minutes. So this is your spec. Okay. Now you say this is what I need to deliver. Now break your head on that. Okay. So okay, so how do I do that? I want to know where I am. I want to know. So you have to provide some sensing mechanisms on each of these teams. I mean members, right? So you can have you may have some devices which can tell you what is the distance between the team members. You may have a different kind of, you will have some intelligent communication, and you may have something on your foot to see where you are walking, right? There is no Wi-Fi, nothing. So you have to design an autonomous thing, right? So that is the first requirement, that something autonomous, and then you have radio contact to transmit that information to a command station. Okay? So what you need to do is you need to design, so you may have different sensors on a first responder body. It could be RF based positioning, motion sensors, maps, motion model, vision information, all that you have to fuse and give me position, velocity and angle, direction, where I am going, correct? Position, velocity and direction, that is what it is, and let us assume that these are denoted by P, V and Q. So just a quick, I think we have some time, 3:15 is my target. So if you want to say position, you need to know which frame of reference you are in, correct? Where am I? Where am I on this earth, right? So you can we can go to latitude, longitude, right? So that means it is with respect to an earth centered reference frame, right? So the different reference frames here. Okay, so there is an earth centered inertial frame, and then you are somewhere on this earth. I mean, this is too high a latitude for us maybe, but let us assume we are here. So here you have on this, you are at a certain xyz coordinate, and there can be a plane. Okay, so plane of reference, and then there is a reference plane with respect to your body. Correct? I can be stationary without moving, and I can keep moving. If my sensor is on my hand and I move my hand, there is a relative change of position of this sensor with respect to my body, and then with respect to the navigation plane if I am walking in this building. Correct? So if I am walking in this building, my building becomes a navigation plane. Whatever is with respect to my body becomes the body plane. So there has to be somewhere you have to map or transform the coordinates of with respect to your body frame to a navigation plane, and then it can be mapped to an earth centered frame, right? You understand what I am saying? And all of you would have studied coordinate geometry, right? So if you have two frames of references, then you know that you can map, right? Sin theta, cos phi, all kinds of things you would have studied. Okay, so that is what you have to do. So let us say that you have a sensor in a shoe, then the sensing mechanism can sense motion in three different axes, right? This way, and this way. Correct? Roll, pitch and yaw, which you would have learned. Okay. So suppose now you have a sensor on your foot. This is your body frame. Okay, XB, YB, ZB is your position of the sensor on the foot, or the foot itself, if you say, is body frame. And now the person is walking. So when your person is walking, it will become the navigation frame. Okay, because you need to understand the physics of the problem. It is very easy to write the English sentence, what I want, but then you have to start going back to physics. How do I design an autonomous system? How do I find my position, right? So can I do something which is useful? So these three reference, if you want to modify or transform coordinates from one reference frame to another, you just have to use these orthogonal matrices, okay, and just multiply. So you have, let us say, x, y, z in one frame, and if you multiply these three matrices with that, you will get a vector which is in the transformed plane. Okay, so you need to know this. Okay, now, so the idea is, can I have an inertial navigation system which I can mount on a foot? That is the idea. So what do you mean by that? We all know that ships and planes do have inertial navigation systems, right, to find out where they are, right? They have inertial navigation. So it is a very old technology. But so what does an inertial navigation system have? They will have large gyroscopes to find out which angle, large accelerometers and so on and so forth. Now you need to know whether you can condense them or compress them or downsize them into something with a foot, and whether it is possible for us to do. Okay, so you have inertial measurement units which have accelerometers and gyroscopes, which all of you are familiar with in your smartphone, correct? You tilt the phone and something is being sensed, right? So this is called an IMU. So it gives you So what is an accelerometer? It has a mass acceleration spring, right? I mean, there is a spring, you give it a force, it will measure what it is calibrated, you will know exactly what is the acceleration. Similarly, a gyroscope will give you angular rate of change of angle, right? So a typical inertial navigation system has this as the block diagram. So what is the block diagram? So it has accelerometers and gyroscopes, okay? Then this accelerometer will give you, because you are wearing it, it will give you body, right? Whatever the body is inducing, whatever force the body is inducing is what the accelerometer will measure, correct? So it is respect to body, SB. The gyroscope will give you the rate of change of that IMU on your body, okay? Now if I want to know what is the angle this sensor is going to look at, I need to integrate over time to get angular rate to angle, correct? So I need angular rate in three directions, and then if I integrate it for each one of them, I will get the change in angle, correct? Change in angle. and the change in angle is what I should give to my those three matrices I showed you to compute the change in the reference frame. So if I want to find what is the acceleration in the body and what is the acceleration in the navigation plane, I should transform my all values of my whatever I am measuring on my body to this navigation plane. Okay. So I will do that by using this transformation. So Sn means I am looking at the force or acceleration, specific force or acceleration in the navigation plane, and this is the information. And then you use a gravity model. You don't worry about Coriolis force, because this Coriolis force is based on rotation of the earth, and that is for high velocity platforms. So I get acceleration here, final acceleration navigation plane. If I integrate, I get velocity. If I integrate, I get position, and I am done, right? I get position, velocity, and this is the angle. So it's very simple, right? So what is the big fuss about? Okay. So now you will realize that any small error in the gyroscope is a device which measures the angular rate. Now what if the sensor is giving you noisy data, is incorrect information? So suppose there is a true value of the angular rate and there is a small error which it generates. So what happens? When you integrate, it grows linearly, right? The error grows linearly with time. There is no way that you can control it. And this error is propagating to 2 more integrals, right? So this is what happens. So this growth of position error is exponential, right, or cubic in some sense. So within a few seconds, 50 seconds, 60 seconds, you will get an error of 80 meters if it is a poor accelerometer and a gyroscope. So the ones in your smartphones before were not that great, now they are better, but still you can't just find your position in some sense. So you have to do a lot more processing. Okay. So how do I correct noisy data? You have to go back to your estimation theory, random processes and all that, and say, oh, I have to do something. So I need a model. I am using that model. I have to do something. Some of you are familiar with this thing called Kalman filter. Okay. So assume that there is a tool for you which can do that, and what do you do for a Kalman filter? You have to implement this complicated stuff where these are matrices of 9 by 9 dimension, 9 by 1 vector. Why 9? Because each dimension I have position xyz, velocity xyz, angle xyz, or angle different angles, right? So this is what you are supposed to implement on a platform. Where is that platform? It is lying on your body, right? You have to build some device which the first responder person has to wear, so that that position is calculated real time. So you have to calculate real time, you have to ensure that the position is estimated properly, and then transmitted back to the command center. So, okay. So now how do I control this growth of error? We all saw that if small error in gyroscope or accelerometer gets integrated and just grows. Suppose somebody told you that at every in a periodic way or in some regular fashion that the velocity of the sensor is actually a certain known value. Okay? Then whatever error you are incurring in the algorithm, you can control it, right? You can say that, oh, I am calculating, my algorithm running on my platform, it is saying that I am, let us say 5 meters, I have traveled 5 meters, okay, or the velocity is so many centimeters per second, but actually the velocity is 0, suppose, or the velocity is known by some other way. Somebody told you that their velocity is something. Then I can correct. I can say, okay, so that growth which was going like this can be brought down, error can be brought down. Again it will grow because you can't, the integration is happening, right? Again it will come down, so you don't allow it to grow. Okay, so controlling the growth of error can be possible if you are able to give the algorithm certain reliable information about these parameters. Okay, either position or velocity or angle. All of them are coupled. Okay. So that is, so if I have another way of finding a reference velocity, then I will be able to control. So what is a natural velocity which happens while you are walking? So if you have the sensor on the foot, whenever you are walking, the foot comes to rest, right? So that means the velocity is 0, correct? If you are able to sense when the foot touches the ground and give that information back to your algorithm, then that means you have given it a nice reference point. And with that, the Kalman filter can do something to control the growth of the error. Okay, so this is called zero velocity update thing. It's a simple thing, but a nice effective one. Okay. So how do I find that the velocity is 0? Right? You can formulate that as a detection problem. Okay, this is like detecting 0 velocity. So you have noisy data. Some sensor is giving you data, saying that this is my velocity, right? Sensor is actually measuring the velocity. Now you have to do some detection. That means you collect some data points and see whether it is 0 velocity or not 0 velocity, correct? So you have to do different kinds of algorithms, plot their curves, what is the detection, what is the false alarm, all kinds of things. This is called receiver operating characteristic. And then you say, okay, one of these algorithms is good for me, I will pick this algorithm. You should also look at what is the computational complexity, because you don't want too much of computation complexity because it has to run real time on your foot, right? So all kinds of trade-offs will be there. There will be engineering trade-offs. Whenever you want to build a system, you have to agree that you have to have a trade-off. Okay. So finally your configuration will be this. You will have an IMU, you will have navigation equations, which we saw before. You will have a zero velocity detector, you give it to a Kalman filter, and the Kalman filter will sort of negotiate with the navigation equation and say, hey, the actual velocity is this, but you are using that. So using that is what it is. So now you are ready, you have MATLAB simulations, you have everything ready. Now you say, okay, now how do I implement it, correct? Something which has to be on your foot or inside your shoe. So the first model which we did was this. There is a module. So this is the IMU. Of course this cannot fit into a smartphone. This is the early IMU of very high quality, which can do at 1200 degree per second and 18 G. So the force it can measure is actually 18 G. You will be surprised that when you walk, the force you apply on your body is several G. Okay, you don't know. Okay, you're really, when you're walking or when you wave your hands, right? Very high acceleration is what you're actually using there. Okay, so you have this, then you have a processor. Obviously this processor is supposed to take the data from the IMU and run all those complicated algorithms, right? You have to run those integrations, you have to run those Kalman filters, all that in real time. That means you have to run this and then give this position information to the command center in real time. Okay. So this is actually, it runs, so the footprint of this is a few centimeters, correct? Few centimeters, is a small module box which goes into the shoe. Okay, you place it in the shoe. So experiments are conducted where it should be placed. Can it be placed on the ankle? Can it be placed on the knee? Can it be placed on the waist? All that. The best position is the foot, because that is the one which actually presses against the floor, so that you get good velocity information. And then so first you do a MATLAB. I am just giving you what went through. So you have to write software, right? So you have MATLAB control scripts, you have an OpenShoe runtime. We call it OpenShoe because everything is open. The algorithm is available for public download. You can use it and build your own system. OpenShoe runtime framework, and you have navigation algorithms. So there is a C code running on the microcontroller, and of course we need to do this testing. Okay. So the first version is an IMU, a computation machine, a communication module. So you have a Wi-Fi adapter, and there is a visualization platform. So the shoe is connected on, it has a USB interface, mini USB. So it is powered by the USB. So we used a Beagle board so that we can use an Wi-Fi adapter to communicate that to a PC. So these are the typical signals what you will receive. So let me go through. It's now 3. Yeah, and these are these zero velocity updates. So you can see from 0 to 60 seconds, okay, how many times the foot has come to rest. Okay, it depends on the pace at which you walk, obviously. So what do you think will control the performance of the algorithm? A person walking slowly or a person walking rapidly? slowly, right, because you are allowing less growth of error and you are resetting your, in some sense, algorithm that sense. Yeah, but you can't control that in a firefighting scenario. You can't ask them to go slow, right? Yeah. So this is an example of a trajectory which we conducted in a lab here in IISc, the Bosch Center. So you start here and you actually walk in a straight line like this, go like that and come back. Now you can see one is that the whole trajectory is skewed, correct? That is because we do not have a good heading information. Remember that this is a relative position you are computing, correct? 0, 0, 0 you start, you stop for 0 velocity, 0, 0, 0, and then it computes how much, delta x, delta y, delta z, right? So this one is, so the angle, if you don't have a proper initial angle which you don't have, then this is what happens. And then you will see that even though the person has come back, you will see there is an error, right? So this is a 2 meters error in the unit. So you have maybe about half a meter or so. So this is the error you incur even with all this complicated Kalman filter and other things running on your stuff. And there are other issues. The Atmel has a, luckily we have it's a 32-bit floating point unit. So it runs reasonably well, but coding had to be done to run it at stuff. So let me not worry too much about. So we wanted to see whether we want more time to compute, then can we reduce the number of samples, but we realized that if I reduce the number of samples, the errors are higher. So we need to run it at full 800 samples per second. This is the trajectory of a person walking down on stairs at the hostel in IISc. So you start here, you go down the corridor, go along the corridor, go down staircase, walk, come back up, and then you will see again that while the person has actually come back, you will see that there is an error of half a meter or a meter, right? So these are not, so it is not an easy problem, okay, that's what I want to tell you, okay, it is not an easy problem to find your position within half a meter or a meter accuracy given these inertial measurement units. See, one more example, if you walk 7 times, this is the trajectory. So here you can see, oh, there is some rotation of the trajectory, right? That means there is a heading problem, there is an initial heading problem. So if you set the heading etc. properly, then you can do that. Okay, so then we said, okay, this is a 1 foot model, so why don't we put 2 units on both the shoes, right? Each shoe will have its own trajectory, but we can constrain that the distance between the 2 shoes should not be more than something, correct? So it's a constraint problem. So that is what we said. So if the right foot is the stationary left foot, the right foot goes up, goes there, and if my estimate of this IMU and this IMU is greater than something which I know that it is not possible for my feet to be too far away, then I can constrain that. I can say it cannot go beyond that. So the difference between the left foot and right foot should be within some stride length. Okay, so that is one you can do. So using that, so you can see that the 0 velocity on the left foot will be occurring at different points in time, correct? It's not that unless you are stationary, it will be 0, but when you are walking, it will not be that unless you are hopping. You hop, then both feet will be 0 velocity at that point. Okay. So this is the pseudo code of the thing which is running in real time. Okay. So this pseudo code is there, and then we want to correct it using this constraint method, right? We call it sphere limit method. And then we have an OpenShoe version 2.0 which has both feet having 2 IMUs, and then the BeagleBoard which has a tiny OS, it has Linux on it, and it runs. So it takes these raw data from both these IMUs and runs the algorithm in a joint way, because you have to constrain that, right? I need raw data coming out from that. Okay. So this is our signal processing building where is it. So this is what happens when you don't have any fusion of data, right? Each one is giving a different trajectory. Left foot, right foot, they don't know each other and they are going on their own. But if you do some correction, it is likely that you can get these both trajectories proper, but still there is error, right? I mean, you can do this. In this case, it is still showing as if I am outside floating in the air, because that wall, these are walls of the building, right? So these are errors. So this is on the terrace of our building. So if I don't do any algorithm without any data fusion, each foot is giving me a different trajectory, but I can get back my original trajectory by using this fusion. Okay, so maybe I'll quickly show you. I think I am well within time. So this is a sort of animation of, we had two methods. So this is walking in our signal processing building in EC department. So you start walking so this is a three-dimensional. So that means the person is walking, going up the stairs, one corridor, going on to the other corridor, climbing down another staircase, and coming back to this point. And now you will see, okay, there is one more corridor excursion which you have to do, and then you come back. Okay, so this is a reasonable, this is a good, it's running in real time. So as the person walks, this trajectory is being in some sense captured. Okay, so video, yeah. So now time for video show. Masked it with a music. So right now, so this is the activity between IISc and KTH, Sweden. So the teams from both sides, students of IISc and students and postdocs from KTH. Shoe was made in Shivaji Nagar, Bangalore. Okay. So even the module was all built here because it was a joint effort. We put a lot of effort in the algorithms. So once the platform is made, so that is the board. So the shoes, and they will be worn by like that and walk. Okay, so the shoe will be embedded in the module will be embedded in the shoe, and of course, you can use it for various applications, for tracking. So you can also track how well you are dancing. So we also had a helmet where you can put a webcam and people can use it. But so this is a demonstration where you can see that he has a helmet and he is carrying that Beagle board, and you will see both the video as well as the trajectory. Okay, the trajectory like what you saw, and you can see that this is a right foot, left foot trajectory. Both are overlapping, and the person is walking on one floor now. And then he will climb up the stairs. So you can see this is going up, right? So he's climbing up the stairs in EC department. He comes back. This is a shortened clip because of time I have. So this is demonstrated to the Swedish ambassador. Yeah. So we actually had Swedish firefighters wearing these modules and actually doing a mock drill. Okay, so you can see this. So we had a team of Swedish firefighters, and then we simulated a fire. We didn't have fire, we had only smoke. Okay, so you can see that there is an Android phone strapped. So the trajectory can be is beamed over Wi-Fi onto the Android phone, and this whole thing was filmed. So this is how the firefighters search for people, right? Because they can't see, it's all full of smoke. So they search for people by crawling, by feeling around, and then you can see that if you have the map of that building, you will be able to position, you will be able to superimpose the trajectories there. See, these are the two firefighters in real time, right? This is a recording of the snapshot of the tablet or an Android phone. So you can see that when they are walking, then you will have this is a staircase. So now they are climbing the staircase. So it can give you the z-axis also. It's a visualization thing. Okay, so it is now on the staircase. You will see that there is error, right? I mean, you can see that they are not really together, but slightly away. But the firefighters were quite happy that we were able to get an accuracy of about a meter or so, because the commander, the team leader said that that is good enough for us to know which room they are in, at least if they have a map, if not a direct pinpointed XYZ coordinate. So that's basically where we end, and it is 3:15.